Since 2015, the Liberal government has turned our airwaves into a propaganda mill and our internet into a padded cell. They've drowned critical media in tax dollars and choked dissent with laws so twisted they'd make Orwell blush. From CBC's $1.4 billion bloated trough to the $595 million local journalist initiative, the Liberals have funneled a staggering $18 billion into the media landscape since 2016, turning Canadian media into a state-controlled megaphone. Under the Trudeau government, CBC's annual budget jumped 27% from $1.1 to $1.4 billion, but here's what's absolutely bananas. The Liberal government recently proposed near doubling CBC and Radio Canada funding to over $2 billion a year, framing it as an investment into national security. They said this will strengthen the public broadcaster's role in promoting national unity and providing reliable information to Canadians, which is an even harder pill to swallow when you find out that viewership has dropped 15% over the last 10 years. Unfortunately, CBC is just the appetizer. The Canada Media Fund has received $3.3 billion or $366 million a year, which funds broadcast television, digital media, and the production of government-approved content. Journalism subsidies made up another $2 billion, $595 million of which went to the Local Journalism Initiative, which is another name for a journalism bailout. Various tax credits, subsidies, and paying journalist salaries made up the rest. This propped up as many as 1,000 newsrooms across the country, all of whom were surviving off the government's misuse of your tax dollars. Then we have the Canada Periodical Fund. This program subsidizes magazines and non-daily newspapers or periodicals, and this has cost Canadian taxpayers $700 million over the last 9 years. Of course, there was also the $600 million in emergency COVID funding, which covered wage subsidies and a general media top-up fund because you got to keep your story straight when you're enforcing tyranny. And because that still wasn't enough, the Liberal government decided to pass Bill C-18, or the Online News Act, a $100 million per year shakedown of Google. Meta, of course, said no thanks and then promptly blocked all Canadian news, slashing outlet traffic by 40%, except for the independents, who don't receive any subsidies. They were hit significantly harder. What's perhaps worse than the shakedown of big tech by Canadian government to pay for their media content is how these funds are dispersed. Contrary to popular belief, this money doesn't go to the little guy to speak his mind. It goes to a government-controlled fund where $67 million is dispersed to government-approved media platforms. When I unpacked this $18 billion propaganda fund, I found myself wondering just how much of the news and media is subsidized by our tax dollars and therefore under the thumb of our Liberal government. So here's what I found. In addition to CBC, 80% of all mainstream TV and radio are subsidized by the government. This includes Bell Media's 35 stations, Rogers' 13 stations, Chorus's 40 stations, and TVA's 10 stations. However, I think it's important to note that CTV, Global, and City TV all fall under this umbrella. So much for balanced news in the mainstream media. 90% of all newspapers and digital news platforms are subsidized by the government. This includes Postmedia's 94 papers, most notably the National Post, Torstar's 70-plus dailies, including the Toronto Star, along with the Globe and Mail, and 70% of magazines and periodicals take annual subsidies. This includes publications like Reader's Digest, Maclean's, and Chatelaine. In other words, under the last 10 years of Liberal rule, $18 billion of your tax dollars have been used to capture 80 to 85% of all mainstream media platforms. In addition, they have also compromised 25% of the independent media channels. So they control the mainstream or the highway of information, and then through these various programs, they have started controlling the side streets where all the independent narratives live. But here's what I found most alarming. According to News Media Canada, this conglomerate of subsidized media outlets are responsible for 90% of Canada's media consumption, meaning government narratives dominate what Canadians see and hear. So I will leave you with this quote from Mark Twain to wrap things up. If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you're misinformed.